that assault weapon would be illegal here. We want safe streets. We don't want your officers to be in the line of fire.
His actions are in contradiction to his oath to serve and protect.
Sheriff Mendrick must rescind his statement immediately and any directives to his employees.
Because if he can't, he's got to resign. And the oath that the sheriff took does not give him the rights of a Supreme Court justice to overturn the laws.
It's not something we're going to proactively go out and look for and enforce at this time.
Does he inspect for possession of child pornography? That's illegal. Does he inspect for possession of guns that would violate the 1934 National Firearms Act? That's illegal. Does he inspect for possession of narcotics? That's illegal. No one has ever said that law was unconstitutional. If you're making a constitutional argument, you have to explain why this law is unconstitutional, but the other states that have similar laws in the books are not. You have to explain why this law is unconstitutional, but the 1994 assault weapons ban, which the federal assault weapons ban was not. And by the way, your argument can't be, well, there's different people on the Supreme Court now. That's not a constitutional argument.
Courts have determined background checks and those FOID cards as constitutional. What do you think makes this different?
Well, I think that I don't know that the FOID card has the background checks, with the federal background checks. I think we all agree. I don't think we have, we can look at that, and there's an area of compromise.
But it fits within the confines of what is constitutional and acceptable.
Does everybody have the right to interpret the laws of the United States?
From our studio in St. Charles, it's just a couple of guys with your host, Ray Rogina and Pat Crimmins, talking everything. Today, we bring forth a topic that has certainly been front and center, not only today, but for quite a long time. Guns, mass shooting, laws prohibiting certain uses, and the right to bear arms. Our guest today, the local chapter in Kane and Kendall counties of Mothers Demand Action, co-lead Steve McHugh, and a Fox Valley state representative involved in gun reform legislation, Representative Maura Hirschauer, a Democrat from the 49th District, and both will join us shortly. But when we return, Pat and I bring forth banter on current events. But first, a word from our fine sponsor.
At McNally Heating and Cooling, we understand that customer satisfaction starts with arriving at your home on time. Your service technician will apply the same attention to detail and quality workmanship to every job, large or small. We offer upfront, honest pricing, and we'll make sure the job gets done right from start to finish. From furnace and air conditioning service, minor repairs, or total equipment replacement, we do it all. Give us a call or find us online and let the luck of the Irish work for you.
We are back, and before we introduce our guest, Pat, let's talk a minute about what we're going to try to accomplish here today. As we talk about guns, gun reform, and a variety of the topics as it relates to the whole issue of mass shootings and the legislation that was just passed in Springfield that's under challenge in the courts.
Yeah, I can't imagine a more timely podcast. The shooting in Monterey, what is it, Half Moon Bay. Apparently there was one in Oakland today.
And the school shooting in Des Moines, Iowa.
And of course, Chicago is always replete with shootings, unfortunately. So it's a topic that certainly needs to be addressed. We're fortunate today to have some great guests, Moms Demand Action, as well as a representative involved in the legislation, the Communities Protection Act, that is the subject of much controversy. I come at this, Ray, just so everybody's clear, as a former prosecutor. I was a prosecutor for 13 years. I was the director of the gang prosecution unit for 5 years. Kane County had an extensive problem with gangs and violence in the 90s, and I was right there, and I saw many, many things, many autopsy photos. Obviously, you come at it from a different perspective. You, as mayor, you had to deal with your own situations. You dealt with the organization, Moms Demand Action, and there was some violence in St. Charles, but obviously it doesn't compare to Aurora and Elgin.
Well, I think what I want to just simply say to our audience is the fact that I don't think you nor I are against guns per se. I came, as one of our guests will tell us, we both came from households where our fathers were police officers, number one, we understand the importance of the certain uses of guns beyond just law and order, obviously. And I'd also like to say, too, that for those of my friends who always like to say that the use of guns is a Second Amendment right, I'd like to just point out the fact that the Heller case in 2008 that was decided by the U.S. Supreme Court, and I think you even have a copy of it over there. Justice Scalia makes some what I think to be very interesting remarks about the use of guns there. And to me, that's always been my creed with respect to how I've interpreted Heller.
You know, the difference between a handgun or a rifle, hunters, shooters, etc. I remember pulling clay pigeons for my brother as he shot them. It's sport, and I appreciate that. As I said earlier, I did a story when I was in high school on the St. Charles. What was it called? What's the paper?
X-ray,
the X-ray about guns. And I just connected yesterday with the guy who helped me. He was a hunter, and he told the story of guns from the perspective of a hunter. But Scalia in Heller, I think, off-quoted remark, which is the right to bear arms it was not a right to keep and carry any weapon whatsoever in any manner whatsoever and for whatever purpose. And I think that says everything that we want to talk about, which is, these high-powered weapons, these high-powered magazines, this body armor. These are the types of things that we want to forbid people from possessing. And I understand the gun owners think that you start there and you start taking our weapons, but I think they are different weapons. And I think that the only way this is going to work out is if lawful gun owners get on our side and start common sense application here that some of these assault weapons they just have to go.
By the way, you quoted one, I think, all-time leading conservative justice, as I might add. And then the Brune case just a few years ago here out of New York City dealt with the whole idea of registration.
Right. And that's what we're talking about here. Registration, possession, manufacture of some of these weapons. This is the problem, and this is what we have to address. Now, Brune did address certain issues in New York regarding the registration and use of weapons, but it did not undo Heller. It didn't undo fingerprinting, background checks, training, that kind of thing. And it still stood for the proposition that you're not entitled to keep and carry any weapon whatsoever in any manner whatsoever and for whatever purpose. So that's out there, and that's something that we have to address. And we limit the Second Amendment to a certain extent as it relates to weapons of mass destruction. So what can we do about that? Well, we're trying to have a weapons ban. The federal government had one. Local states are doing it. But there's a fight all along the way. So I just read where they're trying to amend the Constitution as it relates to political monies. Why can't we amend the Constitution as it relates to assault weapons, amend the Second Amendment? Is that something that can be done? Would the country have a stomach for it? I don't know. But
I don't know either.
If you just qualify the Second Amendment to a certain limited extent regarding weapons of mass destruction, would that fly? I don't know. But that's something that I think should be on the table.
Well, let's see what our guests have to say about this, and we'll be right back. Hello, friends. This is Ray Rogina. I'd like to say a few words about my friends at the Karis Group of Restaurants, one of our sponsors. I've been a frequent guest at all of their fine restaurants for years, one of which is Rookies, which has locations throughout the Fox Valley and beyond. My favorite dish at Rookies is the gyros plate with the Saganaki appetizer. Oopa! My wife, she loves the Hall of Fame chicken sandwich. But I can honestly say that I've never had a bad meal there, regardless of whatever I've had to eat. The wings are out of this world, the salads are delicious, great burgers, tacos, all American specialties, and don't forget their pizza. And of course, you can wash this all down with one of their famous Mai Tais. Try them out. St. Charles, Geneva, Elgin, Hoffman Estates, Huntley, and Roselle. RookiesPub.com. I'll see you there. So we're back here now with two distinguished guests in our studio. Pat, we have Representative Maura Hirschauer from the 49th District. And the 49th District covers a lot of the Fox Valley from South Elgin right down to Aurora, and then, of course, over into DuPage County as well. And we appreciate the representative being here today. And Steve McHugh, who is the co-lead of an organization that many of you have heard about, Moms Demand Action for Sensible Gun Control. This is the Kendall chapter of a larger organization nationwide called Every Town for Gun Safety. And welcome to both of you today. We really appreciate you being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having us here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Well, let me start. I want to start with Moms Demand Action. You know, I was mayor of St. Charles when I watched the organization, at least in this area, begin to develop. And so why don't you talk a bit, Steve, about that organization, how it got started, and how it's evolved into what it is in the way of a lobbying group today.
Sure. So Every Town is kind of like the parent company of all of this. It's headed up by Mike Bloomberg, and he started Mayors Against Illegal Guns. And then Moms Demand Action was formed by a woman named Shannon Watts, who is a mom. And shortly after Sandy Hook, which was 10 years ago, right before Christmas, 10 years ago, she started up a Facebook page and said, we got to do something about this. So just as moms started up a Facebook page, here we are 10 years later, and it has 10 million volunteers now. So she got somebody involved by the name of Debbie Weir, who at the time was the COO of Moms Against Drunk Driving, the MAD organization. Mm-hmm. So Shannon felt that was kind of a similar organization that she could model after. So they worked together on that. And
then here locally, you got involved, and maybe you can tell our audience a bit. First of all, for our audience's edification, Steve, we talked offline, share a common bond in the fact that both of our fathers were police officers, yours in Chicago, mine in Joliet. But you're a Lewis University graduate, and you've been involved in the various activities with the Tri-City schools. And I thought an interesting feature is you've actually gone to gun shows and talked about gun safety. Talk a bit about your involvement in this thing.
That's right. So just a little bit of background on what the moms do. Really, three main things. We're involved in safe storage. It's a program we call Be Smart, and it's providing education. And we do tabling events, different events, handing out free gun locks, which Sheriff Hayne provides to us. He just provided 300 of them to me today. And we hand out, and I'll talk about the gun show in a minute. But education and tabling events there. Legislation, where we will support legislation we believe in, such as what Maura has led recently, and opposition to different bills that we disagree with. And then thirdly, Survivor Network. So it's a network where survivors, 70% of us, of everybody in America knows somebody who is a survivor in some way, knows somebody who suffered against gun violence in some way. You're very familiar, I know, Ray, with the Anjum Coughlin situation where her twin daughters were killed in a murder-suicide by her husband. She is part of that network. And
if I just may add, I was very honored that both myself and Mayor Schelke of Batavia actually attended the meeting, if you will, at Potawatomi Park, and the conversation that ensued about exactly what you talked about. And both were honored to be able to speak that day. So, yes, very familiar.
Right. So as you were mentioning, so we do tabling events, and I think, you ask, why do we need, this organization in a place like the Tri-Cities here? You don't hear about a lot of gun violence or anything else.
Not anymore.
But I hear a different interesting story every time we do tabling events and handing out these free gun locks. So, for example,
and talk about that.
In Elgin, this was just a couple years ago. It was a national night out. It's a situation where the community comes out and meets with the police and first responders and everything else. And we're handing out free gun locks. And a 7-year-old boy is by the table talking to his mom. Mom, can I get one of those locks for Grandpa? He keeps his loaded gun on his nightstand, and he was afraid that his 3-year-old sister was going to grab it off the nightstand. Another situation, we're in Geneva at Chapel Street Church. They're doing a safety fair there. We're handing out locks there, free locks. A young woman comes up to the table. She has 4 of her young children in tow with her, all under the age of 10. And she says, hey, how many of these locks can I take? I'm like, as many as you need, as many as you want. And she says, my husband has 20 guns scattered around the house. All of them are loaded and none of them are locked. This is what we're hearing in our community here, right?
And go ahead. You can finish your thought.
So at the gun show, and I'll talk about how we got into that. My feeling was a lot of times we're preaching to the choir. I want to go to where the guns are. It's kind of like, why would you rob a bank? That's where the money is.
That's right.
So you go to where the guns are. And, we got in there and we just wanted to have common ground. Everybody's for safety. Gun owners, I feel very strongly we need to talk to gun owners more and get that common bond. And we had tremendous amount of common ground. But there was another comment there, where a person was saying, I don't need a gun lock. I have grandkids. I'm not an idiot. I keep all of my guns locked up, except for the one that I need to get to quickly.
There was a video of a 4-year-old, I think, in a diaper walking around hallways of an apartment complex with a gun.
Exactly.
Loaded, I don't know, but it's scary. And when I said we don't hear things anymore, we still have violence in the area. Aurora still has violence. St. Charles had a shooting the other day or last week or so. So it's still prevalent here, but responsible gun owners locking their guns,
exactly
using
right,
safes.
Patrick.
Yeah.
And it's important to realize that accidents are gun violence too.
Right.
Suicides are gun violence too. Suicide by gun represents 60% of all gun deaths in America.
It could be child exploration, too. It could be just a kid, and not suicidal necessarily, but self-injured, right?
Right.
We're going to talk about your legislation in a second, but I want to piggyback on what Steve said and ask you about your involvement in this organization, because you are part of the grassroots efforts here on Moms Demand Action. So, Representative, why don't you talk about that a bit?
Yes, I was actually back in 2018, I want to say, or we started having conversations about starting a chapter here in Kane and Kendall County. Ellen Gibson, I know you know, is St. Charles proud resident. She was the force behind getting this organization started. And 2018, January, we had our first initial meeting at a church in Geneva. There was maybe 15 people there. One person who came in, very unassuming, was our future Congresswoman Lauren Underwood. She was a candidate at the time, just came to the meeting to show support and see what she could do to help. And then, we started to get the ball rolling with planning, and February 14th, 2018, the Parkland shooting happened, and our membership exploded overnight. People were activated to get involved, and that's how Moms Demand Action in Kane and Kendall County really grew steam. We started supporting candidates that supported common sense gun safety legislation. We started electing candidates up and down the ballot. Congresswoman Underwood was successful that year. And it was really a movement. And I think what's important about the Moms Demand Action movement is that it's not about lecturing. It's not about grabbing guns. It's about changing the conversation and changing the culture in this country that surrounds guns. It's talking about safety. It's bringing the conversation down to a level where everybody can participate, gun owners, non-gun owners. And it's really breaking down barriers. So I'm really proud of the work we've done in this community and they've done across the country with the Moms Demand program.
Well, I wanted to talk a little bit about you, give everybody some background into you and where you come from and why you are currently a representative. So tell us a little bit about you outside of the Moms Demand Action that you've already discussed.
Sure. Well, I had Moms Demand Action was a huge reason for me running for office. So that's a big part of it. Prior to that, I was an elementary school teacher. I was raised to be of community service, the daughter of two parents, two educators, and union members. So service was always in my background. I took some time off. I have 3 children, so I took some time off while my kids were young and was very involved in nonprofits here in the Fox Valley. So got to know the needs of the folks here, whether it be simple things like diaper drives or working with our food pantry in Batavia. So I was community focused, then became a little more politically focused after the 2016 election. And found my voice with Moms Demand. They set up a really great framework for how to advocate for what you want and what change you want to see. I think before joining Moms Demand, I had never met my Mayor Shelkey. I live in Batavia, mayor of 41 years, but I had never met him before. Sure. I had never been to a city council meeting. I had never traveled to Springfield to speak to my legislators. And Moms Demand gave us the framework to do all those things, which then gave you the framework to maybe see yourself in those positions of decision making. So that's really what led me to run for office. And I was elected in 2020 and am currently starting my second term.
So inspired by the group itself?
Yes.
Nothing specific to your own life as it relates to guns.
Well, I think what Steve has mentioned is that ripple effect of gun violence can be felt in every corner of our country. There are little things that have happened throughout my life. I actually grew up in the state of Maine. Huge hunting.
I love Maine. Yeah, I vacationed there. Yeah. Bedford Pool.
Yeah. Southern Maine in York, but a big hunting community. So I knew folks with guns. In high school, one of my friend's fathers died by suicide, which was pretty impactful. And we had an accidental shooting when I was in college. So those ripple effects are felt everywhere. And then I think my biggest connection is being a parent, having 3 kids who now have to go to school and have lockdown drills. I just spoke to students at West Chicago Lehman Middle School. They now have clear backpacks. Every student at Lehman Middle School has to have a clear backpack for safety. Right. We never had that threat of gun violence or someone bringing a gun to school when we were kids. So that really motivated me. And those students in Parkland who stood up and really begged the adults in the room to listen and take action.
If you weren't moved by that, I don't know what type of person you actually are, because that experience in and of itself was moving, put together all the other experiences, all the other shootings. But as it relates to you personally, you have an office at 946 Neltnor Boulevard.
Yes. Yep.
That's Neltnor Boulevard. It's office suite 108 in West Chicago. Your number is 331-465-9661. And I have a website of Maura49.com.
That's right.
Yes. And I've looked at it and it's fabulous.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, in my humble opinion.
Yeah. And Altnor is just 59. That's Route 59 in West Chicago. And there's an Aldi right there, which is how I help people orient to our office.
Okay.
Everyone knows where Aldi is.
Well, as a former prosecutor, and I talked about that a little bit with you, Illinois has some tough gun laws and some background check laws and things like that. Talk a little bit about the laws that were on the books before we started into the Community Act.
Well, there are some federal laws, all automatic weapons are outlawed in Illinois. We have our FOID card system. So you have to apply to get your firearm identification card and go through a background check process for that. We have waiting periods to purchase guns. We do have, we're like a donut hole here in Illinois. We're surrounded by states that have less stringent gun laws than us. We have some pretty strict ones. But we're still seeing illegal guns on our street, more guns on our streets than ever before, and trying to get to the bottom of what is causing that is a really multifaceted problem. The Protect Illinois Communities Act, I like to say, is a piece of the puzzle in that multifaceted.
Well, we'll talk about that in a little bit, but in terms of what we have now, before that act, can we find that information somewhere? Do you have that information, Moms Demand Action website? Or?
Oh, sure. I think every town has a great website where they you can click on your state.
Yes, you can. That's exactly right.
And see
every state
exactly
what's there.
Yeah, exactly what the laws are there.
How would you describe what the problem is in terms of guns and violence in the state of Illinois?
Oh, that is
in a nutshell.
That is not a simple question to answer. Like I said, I think it is extremely multifaceted. It's a number of problems. I like, number one, the culture of guns in this country, I think contributes. There's just more guns in this country than there
When you say culture of guns, you sent me some of the legislative testimony that was given for the act. And I heard someone speak, the name escapes me, but I think he was a legislator at some point. But he talked about the generational history of the love of weapons and how his dad taught him and how he taught his son and the guns and the targets and everything else. And those are the type of gun owners that I think everybody's kind of fine with, as long as the weapon's appropriate. But as we know, and as we used to say in the prosecutor's office, a gun's got nobody's name on it, and a weapon, a bullet, has nobody's name on it. So you're right. These guns are coming in from other states, Indiana, straw purchasers, things like that. It's a problem that as a legislator, do you feel you can control?
I think we are certainly trying very hard in many different alleyways to control and to give law enforcement the tools and technology they need to combat those straw purchasers. There are bigger things at play. For many years under the Trump administration, we didn't have a director of the ATF. That has a trickle-down effect that I think impacts a place like Chicago and a state like Illinois directly. We know that law enforcement needs more tools and more technology, and that's sustainable funding. So that's a piece of the puzzle.
So we're going to take a break right now. And after a word from our sponsors, I want to talk a little bit about Highland Park and how that kind of initiated some more response by Illinois.
Hello, friends. This is Ray Rogina. You face technology challenges every day that threaten to steal business, compromise data, and bring your business down. Without a good partner to help protect from phishing, ransomware, viruses, data breaches, employee turnover, and cybersecurity threats, your business is at risk of losing everything. TechWorks has been the trusted IT partner to Fox Valley businesses for over 20 years, keeping systems secure and providing extraordinary customer service, helping your business grow. Call TechWorks today at 630-482-2227 or visit www.techworks.com. That's TechWorks with a Q. TEQ Works, and see how TechWorks IT service can transform and secure your business.
We're back, and we're here with Representative Maura Hirschauer.
That's right.
Yeah, how'd I do?
Good job.
Nobody trains you for the podcast. You just come in.
Steve McHugh has an interesting and simple name, a lot simpler name.
Right. We used to
Crimmins.
We used to have a tavern, McHugh's, right? Didn't we?
Well, no, McHugh owned a tavern.
That's right. Oh,
so tavern anywhere you want to go.
That's right.
That's exactly right.
But again, before we get too excited here, let's talk a little bit about the Highland Park shooting and kind of how that initiated the move into the legislation that we're talking about here today. What was the Highland Park shooting from your recollection? How many people were killed, injured? What kind of weapon was used? Just give me a summary of what you remember.
Sure. Well, on July 4th, which is a very special day in this country, just, I think, minutes after the 4th of July parade stepped off in Highland Park, a shooter on a rooftop shot over 60 rounds in around a minute into the crowd, killing, I don't want to get the numbers wrong and misremember, killing
7 people, I think. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And wounding over 40 others.
Yeah, 48.
Yeah. Some of us at this table have marched in parades before. I know we have all attended parades, but we know what that's like. For me, when I march in a parade as a candidate, I have my family with me. I have my supporters with me. It's a big, joyous occasion. And for all those folks at the parade and watching the parade, it turned into a nightmare that will not end for many years. We had our Democratic working group was led by Representative Bob Morgan, who represents Highland Park, was at the parade that day with his supporters, his family, his 2 children. And he brought us to Highland Park, to the spot where the shooting happened. And we were standing in the square. Highland Park is beautiful. We were right by this cute breakfast spot, low building, so we could see where the shooter was, and the police chief and the fire chief and the city officials spoke to us just about what it felt like, the chaos, the confusion, the blood, just the destruction that was caused, and the ability for the shooter to shoot so quickly so that you have no idea what's happening until it's too late. Mm-hmm. That high-powered ammunition, it's deadly. And to really be there in that space was incredibly impactful. And I just know the mayor of Highland Park and the city officials, everybody was helping that day. Every person was an EMT. My colleague, Bob Morgan, was on the scene stopping the bleed. It was a day no one will ever forget, and it was a tragedy. You
got 55, the way I counted, 55 people directly affected, either 7 dead or 48 injured, but you have all of the families and everyone else affected by that. The whole thing is PTSD for the people who were there, and then you've got people that are affected by it who maybe want to march in this year's 4th of July parade who are resisting it because of what happened. So the impact of this is huge. It affects the entire country. And this is one mass shooting. It's close to home, but it's one mass shooting out of, in the last few days we've had 5? Mm-hmm. So, and then there's Chicago.
If I could add on to that
Sure.
Highland Park story as well. So just very recently, as I said, we make phone calls into legislators to support. And this was just a couple of weeks ago. We're calling, I was on a Zoom call, calling senators and House representatives to support Maura's bill and this bill. And I notice a name of a person, a young woman. It's like, that's the last name of a guy I went to college with. And so in the chat, I said, hey, do you know Mark? Yeah, he's my dad.
Wow.
You know, why do you ask? So, I went to college with him. I was good friends with him. And then I texted Mark later on that night. I said, you should be very proud of your daughter. She's involved in all of this. It's Students Demand Action, which is part of Moms Demand Action as well. And he said, yeah, she got involved because we were at the parade and bullets hitting the sidewalk all around us. We saw things that no human being should ever want to see. And it's just devastating.
Yeah. I have my favorite Facebook post is a picture of a kind of a logic diagram. It goes from mass shooting, thoughts and prayers, Facebook debates, everyone forgets, Congress does nothing, crickets chirping, a mass shooting. Sometimes it feels like that, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Well, in Illinois, we did something about it, right? So tell us a little bit, for those who don't know, what's the bill? We know what kind of prompted it, but what's in the bill? Summarize what it does, and let's talk about it a little bit.
Sure. Well, the Protect Illinois Communities Act does 4 major things. One of them we talk about often. It bans the sale of assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. I think that's a critical part of the bill. It shut that front door on sales the moment Governor Pritzker signed the bill, which is why we saw that bill get signed mere hours after it passed, which I'm a young legislator, but I've never seen that happen before. That's a really quick turnaround. And we wanted to make sure we were shutting the front door on sales. It grandfathers in folks who have legally owned these assault style weapons prior to the signing of the bill. So
outside of sale, though, is also banning possession?
Banning possession.
Unless you're grandfathered in.
Unless you're grandfathered in.
And let's talk a little bit about the grandfather. How does that work?
Well, we have built in a year. So a little less than a year from now, January 1st, 2024, folks who have legally purchased assault weapons will hopefully use a portal on the Illinois State Police website and apply for a credential on their FOID card to let law enforcement know that they legally possess those guns, and also they will be required to give a serial number for the weapons that they own.
Okay. Now, I interrupted you. What else does the bill do?
Like I said, there's a ban on the sale and possession of high-capacity magazines. Those are limited to a 15-round magazine for a handgun and a 10-round magazine for a long gun. There is no grandfathering in of magazines. There's no serial numbers on magazines, so that enforcement of that was tricky.
Okay.
It also makes some improvements on our firearm restraining order.
And explain that a little bit for the folks that don't know.
Sure. So a couple of years ago, we passed something that's known as a red flag law. In Illinois, we call it a firearm restraining order, meaning if you live with someone in the house who owns guns and you know them to be a threat to themselves or other people, you can petition the courts to have their guns taken away for a certain period of time. The law enforcement will take them in and keep the weapons for 6 months is what the original policy said. Our bill changes that to 1 year time frame. So we're strengthening that.
So there's some due process involved there.
Absolutely.
The person who owned the gun originally can try and get the gun back after a hearing, correct?
Yes.
Okay. But if the judge after that year or after a hearing doesn't feel as though the weapon is in safe possession, the judge can continue the time frame?
Yeah.
Okay.
Correct.
Anything else about the bill generally? I'll get into specific questions.
And the final piece was the creation of an anti-trafficking unit within Illinois State Police. So the Protect Illinois Communities Act, we really tried to be mindful of the gun violence epidemic as a whole. As I've said before, assault weapons is a piece of that puzzle. Huge piece here in Illinois is interstate gun trafficking. So this allows ISP to create a unit using ATF resources and local law enforcement to try to tackle that issue.
Well, tell me a little bit about that. So we have interstate commerce of drugs, and you're trying to attack that. To what end? I mean, we find a gun in Batavia. It comes from Indianapolis. What are we doing with it? What's the law?
Well, I guess so as I said, I'm a first grade teacher, not a lawyer. So I'll tell you a story about what I've learned about that.
Okay.
In Aurora, we have a ballistics center for the collar counties. The NIBIN is the National Ballistics Tracing Center. So let's say someone shoots at a stop sign in Aurora, which happens sometimes. You pick up the bullets, bring them back to the NIBIN Center, and you trace them to a homicide in the city of Chicago, to a gun that was used in a homicide in the city of Chicago. And you follow the points. ATF officials also are on site in Aurora at our NIBIN Center, as are the Aurora Gang Unit officers.
Oh, yeah.
You know this better than I do. So they're all working off those ballistics to trace that gun. And ultimately, if it gets traced back to a seller in Kentucky, then you can pinpoint a trafficker and use federal officials.
Okay. So we're presuming that we're going to be able to find the gun.
Yes, those are presumptions.
Yeah.
Yes.
The mere projectile doesn't necessarily identify the gun.
It needs to be.
So we find the gun. We use these resources to trace back the gun to somebody from a different state. Mm-hmm. Then the federal regulation applies in addition to Illinois communities?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just one question, Pat, before you get any specifics about the legislation. I've read commentary in the paper after this legislation was passed, Representative, about the opposition. We'll just say the opposition calling it feckless, or saying, that the focus should be on punishment. The punishment, the ordinance, the statute should have clear-cut punishment for those. To me, that's after the fact punishment. What's the general theory of the opposition, if I may?
Oh, the theory of the opposition?
Yeah,
what's the opposition?
I'm not going to define the opposition.
Yeah.
She knows there were individuals in the legislature and the General Assembly who are opposed to this.
Yeah.
Oh, the bill.
What's their opposition?
Second Amendment rights. I think there are a bunch of straw man arguments that happen about mental health, and I find frustration with some of my colleagues who ask us, why we're doing this and not furthering mental health. And I tell them every single year you vote no on a budget that puts more money into mental health resources in the state of Illinois. The only time you talk about it is when we discuss common sense gun violence prevention legislation. So, I think you'll hear the same thing from NRA talking points that I hear.
I knew we would hear NRA at some point.
Right.
I appreciate that.
And my thoughts as a former, I know this podcast isn't about me, but my thoughts as a former prosecutor, their mental health, there's a crisis in this country, no doubt about it. And it's worse than it's ever been before, or at least we now know about it more than we did before. But the people I prosecuted for shooting people, there was no mental health issues there.
The other thing, that people with mental illness are more likely to be a victim of shootings than they are to be a perpetrator.
But the organizational structure of a street gang, I mean, this wasn't about mental health. This was about power. So to say that every gun shooting or every gun possession is about mental health disorder is a fraud, because that's not true. There are evil people out there. Let's start there. And obviously we have to deal with this mental health crisis.
And it goes beyond, politics too. We hear this saying all the time, guns don't kill people, people kill people.
Right.
My point of view is people kill people with guns.
Right.
And if people kill people, why give them easy access to guns?
Well, that's what we talked about.
You need to address both.
Right. That's what we talked about a little bit earlier. It's a lot easier to kill people with an assault weapon than a handgun. We talked about Jack Ruby had to get intimate with Lee Harvey Oswald to shoot him. Bobby Kennedy had to get intimate. These guns, you can stand back for I don't know how many yards, but it's you don't have to get close at all, so it makes it easier.
Exactly.
So we're going to talk a little bit about the resistance to the bill, but I wanted to get to this portal that you refer to, the registration aspect of it. You said that you have a weapon, you can register through the portal. Is there a fee involved?
No fees involved.
So you register your weapon, all's well, you don't have to do another thing.
That's absolutely right.
And by registering the weapon through the portal, you have modified your FOID card or just kind of...
It's officially called an endorsement. So you have get a little endorsement on your FOID card to let folks know.
Okay.
And it speaks to the enforcement of the ban. When people register their weapons, that allows law enforcement to easily just ascertain whether it's a legal gun or an illegal gun.
Let me ask you about that information. Do you share that information?
No, it's not FOIA-able.
It's not in the database, though. If I'm a police officer and I pull over Timmy, my database might tell me that Timmy's a known member of the Maniac Latin Disciples. If I go to such and such a house, domestic violence call, do I have knowledge that there's an assault rifle in that house?
You would have knowledge that the person in the house had a FOID card,
right,
and that the person in the house had the FOID endorsement for the assault
Okay,
weapon.
so the police would benefit from that information because they would now know that in that house, it's not just a handgun and a shotgun. There's an assault weapon in there.
That's right.
That's been endorsed properly.
That's right.
Now, that presupposes that we endorse properly.
That is correct.
Okay. I want to get into punishments a little bit. What's the punishment for failure to endorse?
I believe it is a misdemeanor for your first violation, and a fine.
Right.
Yeah. And
so give me a scenario where I discover this, that you haven't endorsed it properly outside of the one I just gave you.
If I'm pulled over, I guess, and I have a weapon in my car,
right,
and you check my FOID card and you notice it's not
endorsed. Right. But otherwise, if I don't have any contact with you or your house or anything else, I don't know whether you've properly endorsed or not.
Right.
Okay.
There are a lot of things that work that way, right?
Sure.
You don't know if I have illegal substances in my house.
Right.
You're just walking by.
Well, we talked a little bit offline about this idea of failure to register as a sex offender. You're familiar with those statutes? Mm-hmm. Sex offenders, if they move, they have to re-register their address so that people know that they're there. And then there's notification to the community. That's a lot different than telling everybody there's an assault rifle at Phil's house down the street. But that's a crime if you fail to register. Obviously, how do we know that somebody failed to register? There's a police force that's checking on whether Timmy is properly registered. There's a whole entity that does that. Not for this. We're not going to be following up, seeing whether you have an assault weapon, you have an assault weapon. So we've heard about the controversy. The sheriffs have indicated generally, we're going to get to that, about this idea that they're not going to enforce this aspect of it. Is that what your understanding is? It's just this aspect of the registration?
That is what their statements have said,
right,
that they are not going to enforce this aspect of it. Their statements have made a whole host of other claims about the legislation.
Well, let me get to those later.
Okay.
But I did want to kind of lay the groundwork on this registration issue. Well, let's talk penalties. We have new legislation. We're dealing with very dangerous weapons that, if used improperly, can hurt many, many people in a short time frame. What kind of penalties are we talking about here?
Misdemeanors for possession.
Possession of the assault rifle is a misdemeanor?
Sorry.
No, my reading of the bill was it's a kind of a class 3 felony.
Yes, I'm sorry. I was reading my wrong thing.
Right.
It's the same as a possession of any illegal weapon.
Okay. And why didn't we feel as though this should warrant a higher grade felony, a class X, which is 6 to 30 years, that kind of thing?
Well, again, I can let you steer this conversation as a former prosecutor, but I know that the work we've been doing in the Illinois House and Senate to transform our criminal justice system, be mindful of the mistakes that have been made in the past.
Yes.
With, as we look at what happened in the 80s and what happened with drug mandatory minimums. And I think my colleagues are mindful of that and using those sorts of thoughts as guiding principles.
Well, you and I could talk long and hard about mandatory minimums and penalties, but what I'm interested in is the penalties for these weapons. Is Class 3 felony, but is that probationable or is it a mandatory minimum? You said it's the same as any gun, illegal gun.
Correct. I do not believe it's a mandatory minimum.
Right. Okay. And that's true for the magazines.
Yes.
And you've also indicated already that the failure to endorse or register has a certain penalty. It's not a mandatory minimum. As a matter of fact, it's a misdemeanor unless it's your second offense, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And I think you told me offline that the penalty aspect to the bill is kind of a result of compromise.
Yes,
All right.
absolutely.
I mean, it's not necessarily going back to the 80s and the war on drugs, but you, in order to get this passed, you compromised. And I take it you compromised with Republicans or with other fellow Democrats?
We have a large, diverse Democratic caucus with lots of different voices. And
sure.
I think one of the things I've learned in my short time there is to really try to listen and understand where each person is coming from. Each representative is representing their own community, and to listen to those voices when they come to the table. So,
and I'm not criticizing, I'm trying to find out, there's no differentiation between a regular illegal gun and an illegal assault weapon.
That is my understanding.
Okay. Now, this bill was passed with the support at the time of testimony being taken with some law enforcement, correct?
That's right.
Can you give us just a brief idea of what law enforcement?
Cook County Sheriff testified in support of the bill. The Lake County Sheriff testified in support of the bill. Illinois State Police came to the table and were neutral on the bill and willing to have conversations about enforcement and implementation of their purview over the FOID card. And I had several meetings with our Illinois State Association of Police Chiefs. And there were some suburban police chiefs that were supportive of the bill. Ultimately, I think that association was not in support of the bill. But again, that's a diverse association across the state. And the Sheriff's Association also was at the table for negotiations. We had meetings with them in our working group, and they had ample opportunity to speak to us about their issues.
Okay. Are you suggesting they did not speak about the issues that they, after the fact, have made vocal?
We knew where the Sheriff's Association stood. We knew it is a group that
I understand.
We knew where they stood.
Right.
I was still very surprised with all of their statements after the fact.
Right.
At no point did I hear the Sheriff's Association say they would not enforce.
Okay. So this passion that we've heard after the fact was not articulated before the fact.
That's right.
But you did understand certain positions that weren't necessarily consistent with passage.
Yes. I think we always are striving for compromise when we're bringing legislation forward with something as polarizing as gun safety legislation. I just know there are certain folks that are not going to be on board no matter what the compromise is.
Sure.
I understood the sheriffs to be that way.
I understand. I think Ray wanted to talk a little bit about this opposition.
Thanks, Pat. Pat laid the foundation here by indicating that there's obviously opposition. And of course, you're not, neither you nor Steve are blind to the fact that it's been pretty forceful in the press. Sheriff Odelberg, you referred to earlier in Lake County, was very supportive in the press. And then we have Sheriff Mendrick in DuPage County, and our own sheriff here, Sheriff Hain in Kane County, indicating in a broad sense, and I have my own interpretation of this, indicating they weren't going to enforce the law. Now, we can get into the semantics of what that's all about, but to me, I like the headline in the one paper that goes to Rich Miller in the Capital Facts columns: sheriffs inflame public for no good by refusing to enforce assault weapons law. I thought it was pretty political, to be very blunt about it. They're playing to an audience they like to play to. And I'd like to get your reaction. Having before I get that, I'd also like to point out that there have been at least 3 editorials that I've read in 2 Chicago papers, Tribune and Sun-Times, and the Daily Herald, all blasting away at this, if anything else, inflammatory commentary.
I agree with you. I right off the bat saw those statements for what they were, and I thought they were fear-mongering. They were misrepresenting what the Protect Illinois Communities Act did, deliberately misrepresenting. And I led both legislators in DuPage County and here in Kane County to write letters in response to our sheriffs. The DuPage County sheriff, he did not pull punches with his statement. It was very clear. And he's digging in harder than ever now.
His statements were in the press today.
Yeah. And
these letters that you speak of are on your website, correct? Yes. So people can find those and read those if they wish.
Yes. Yeah.
Then we had the restraining order and, of course, the lawsuit by 866 plaintiffs. And in Southern Illinois, we've got at least a hold on this thing. I'd like to, conclude this by really kind of coming back and saying, where do you see this all playing itself out in the future? What's the future of all of this? Are we looking at some kind of constitutional amendment eventually? Talk to us about that.
Well, I will let everyone know we fully expected all those lawsuits to come down immediately after the bill signing. We were prepped and ready for them. Our Attorney General is ready for the battle ahead. And we really believe that we crafted the tightest piece of legislation we could. And we feel strong that it will withstand scrutiny. So we're just digging in, holding on. And I expect if there's any major movement, it won't be done in those lower courts. The real fight could possibly be at the Supreme Court, and we don't know what that will bring.
Well, the statement by the Everytown for Gun Safety, I thought was pretty forceful when they said, we strongly disagree with the court's decision, which focused on meritless claims of procedural defects in the passage of the law and included a gross misreading and misinformation of the recent U.S. Supreme Court interpretation of the Second Amendment. I'd like to add one more thing if I could. And that's just something that bothers me personally as a citizen, not necessarily a commentator here. And that's the idea that, and perhaps a reaction from either one of you on this point, and that is our officials opining in the press that this or that or that is unconstitutional. I don't get it. Maybe you can enlighten me on this, because I just don't get how they have the audacity to do something like that.
Well, I spoke earlier about how I was at West Chicago Middle School, Lehman Middle School, in their civics class yesterday. And they're learning about the 3 branches of government right now. And that seems to be something that our sheriffs are missing. It's my job as a legislator to pass the best possible laws for my community. It is the judicial branch's job to make sure that those stand up to constitutional scrutiny, and the sheriff's job to enforce the laws.
One of the things I pointed out is, are you as a county official insured for inaction? And I don't think you are. I mean, there's negligence, but to say out in front of the public, I refuse to enforce this bill, assume something bad happens, something horrible happens, and he could have done something. He's not insured.
Yeah. The liability that the sheriffs have opened the counties up to, I think, is
and themselves.
But you take a county like DuPage, I think it's one of the wealthiest counties in Illinois, and it was gross negligence on the sheriff's part.
Right. The better course, I think, I'm not a public relations specialist here, but the better course would have been to say nothing.
Yes.
Always
good.
And then if it comes up and Billy didn't enter information on the portal, deal with it then.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, the time has flown by here. We've had just a very honest and detailed conversation about legislation, about guns. I think I want to conclude by saying I don't think anybody at this table has ever suggested we're going to just take guns away, period. This is a point about, as Steve opened up the conversation, about safety, about some degree of reform, and about sensibility in the use of guns and the right under the Second Amendment. And,
well, I'd like to see those sentences go up a little bit. That's the next fight, one step at a time, right? We did what we could to get this done, and hopefully it'll withstand scrutiny, and we can move on. But I did want to say that I thank Steve and Maura for their passion and for their work. This is how it gets done. So at some point, I don't know if we're going to beat down the NRA, but if we have 10 million members of Moms Demand Action and we have money behind us, I don't see how we can compete. As a prosecutor, I used to always say, well, all we really need to fight the NRA is money and passion, right? And we have it, but I think now we're starting to see it.
Well, and also, Pat, what gives me hope is that right now, firearms are the leading cause of death for children age 17 and younger. And for the 100 years before that, from 1920 to 2020, it was automobile accidents. Right. So to my earlier point, you address both the car or the gun and the driver.
Right.
That's what was done in the car industry. Seatbelts, and there's a law that you wear seatbelts, right?
Exactly.
I believe you have to do both. You can't do just one or the other.
And if I may, the thing that led to car safety was a bunch of lawyers filing lawsuits. If we can start suing people who negligently store their weapons, negligently fail to put it in the portal, whatever it is, then people will start paying damages. Insurance companies will start listing, and maybe responsible gun owners will take this under control.
There is, just quickly, legislation underway right now in Illinois to go after gun manufacturers civilly, and we'll see where we get with that. But it's something the Attorney General is committed to, and some really smart folks in the House are working on that. So
and they have paid historically. They've paid in a few mass shootings. So let's bring the checkbook.
Well, our thanks to both Representative Maura Hirschauer and Steve McHugh from Moms Demand Action, Kane and Kendall chapters, for joining us today. We really appreciate both of you coming here and talking about what I think would be a very timely and worthwhile topic. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
That concludes another edition of Just a Couple of Guys. For our producer, Paul Stukel, for Pat Crimmins, this is Ray Rogina wishing you a pleasant day. Wherever you may be, you taking the time to listen to us and supporting our sponsors is gratifying. We will continue to bring forth interesting guests talking about a variety of topics. So until next time, a reminder to be safe. So long, everyone.